All right, welcome back. It's Art with Anderson. I'm your host, Joe Anderson, and today we're going to be getting distracted by some shiny objects. And if you're in need for a distraction, thank you for tuning in. Hopefully, this will be all good. And I want to make sure that you guys know that I really appreciate every time you guys tune in. We got a big community that's starting to grow, and that's why I'm here. I want to be able to share this stuff, and honestly, you're giving me an outlet to connect with the world, so I do really appreciate that. So we're going to dive right in, and hopefully you've been using this reflective period in your life to start to think about reflections and how they occur when it comes to drawing them. So I have a few examples here just to get us started, and I'll be putting those up on the screen. And what I want you guys to think about when I put this picture on the screen here, we have this silver ball, okay? Now, the silver ball that we think of, like we always ask ourselves, what is the color of silver, or even gold for that matter? A lot of people think, oh, silver is gray, and gold is a little bit more yellowish. There's some truth to that fact, but when you think about it, think of more of a mirror, right? What color is a mirror? And what's so unique about a mirror like object, something that reflects light perfectly or close to it, is that it doesn't really have a color of its own. In reality, it's taking the light and color from around it and bouncing it back at our eyeballs at different angles. So if we look closely at this ball that I've put up here, look closely at the reflection. We can actually see a picture of the environment that this person took the photo in. So what's interesting is this silver ball actually almost, it collects all the light in a unique way, and because it's reflective, the light rays bounce directly off of it and have a very unique like it's almost like it bends around the object, so it almost distorts the reality. So let's pull up another picture here to see if we can get another look at an example of reflection. Now this piece is a drawing that I did during Inktober. And I had, as you may know, I did 9 years in the classroom as an art teacher. And this bell sat on my desk. Using a bell is a lot more effective than yelling, I've found, because you'll lose your vocal cords, and it's a great way to get people's attention. But after I quit teaching, I started off doing some drawings, and as a part of reflecting on this new stage of life I was entering in, this bell became a way for me to do that. And if you look closely at it, I'll kind of blow it up for you so you can see some of the detail in there. You can see very carefully that even though this is drawn, it was actually done with ink washes with a brush. If you look at some of those details in there, you can actually see at the center there's a post that's in my studio in Chicago, and there's a light up at the top right there. You can see some of the shadows. You can see a door and kind of the left center area of that reflection, and there's even a plant. Now, it's not super detailed, but we gave the impression that we're looking into a space through a reflection. And what makes it a little bit more distorted is the shape of this reflective surface. So it's not just like a mirror, it's rounded, so it's going to distort how you're looking into it. And our brain, unless we're looking very closely, we don't really pay attention to how it changes everything. So let's take another look at a flat reflective surface, not necessarily a mirror, but I was looking for some pictures online that would show us this stuff, and that would be this picture. And you might not think of, okay, here's the U.S. Capitol, and there's some water in front of it, and it looks like it's actually kind of frozen. Let me blow it up for you so you can take a better look at it. If we look at the reflection in the pond, it's not as sharp as we saw in that crisp, really mirrored surface of that steel. So reflections aren't always super crisp, and sometimes the surface isn't perfectly smooth. It causes a little bit more fuzzy appearance, but we can definitely start to see the ways that the ice or like even small waves on the surface can affect how that reflection is. So today I'll be talking about some strategies for, first of all, seeing the reflection, and then some of the kind of science about where the reflection is going to show up and how to draw it accurately. Okay, so let's start with this Capitol building. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller so you can see my drawing pad here. 1 second. Oh, come on. Let's see. Image. Small. Okay. I'm still getting used to some of these this live casting software, but it is kind of cool. I'm going to try to keep it relatively large, but this will be enough space for us to explore. Okay, now one of the things that you're going to see most often, and I remember trying to replicate this. I used to have this job. I used to have this job when I was in college as a graphic designer, and at that time, Apple had these really cool advertisements where the word Apple would be reflected in this like white room, and you could see kind of a reflection. So we're going to just try to look at this picture of the Capitol and think about where the reflection is going to show up, and it's kind of similar to that Apple effect that I was talking about. Now, in the past, if you watch those perspective videos, you remember there was kind of like a horizon line. The horizon line is always a great place to start whenever you're drawing a landscape. You know, landscape is considered anything that's like outdoors, and it's not necessarily just drawing a single person as a subject. Now, the horizon's generally in the middle, and actually the shoreline that we see, we actually can't see the horizon as it is because it's behind the building, but we're going to draw the shoreline of this reflection pool down here, and then we'll draw the top of the Capitol. Let's just simplify the shape, and we're going to just draw the dome up here, over here. And I'm keeping this very simple just to illustrate the point. I'm also going to just draw a simplified tree here, and there's like a dark area in the picture right over here that'll be kind of useful. This is another tree. You can see that there's a shape right here very close to the water, and there's a little, like another little I don't know what you'd call these, plinths, or you know, like a memorial area here. And there's like a really nice white, like marble area right here, and then below this is our water. Now the line of the water kind of extends over here, but I hope you know that, you know, this tree line up here is going to be kind of important when we draw our reflection. So what I want to focus on is, forget the reflection just now. When we're doing a reflection, always focus on light versus dark first. You can think about color later, but light versus dark, or value, is going to be the most important thing when drawing your reflections. So let's look for some dark areas in this picture. I'm focusing, see that tree that I had? I'm going to shade that in so it's a dark area. And then I see some kind of shadow shapes down here. So I'll just keep that simple. I'm keeping the shapes simple for demonstration purposes, but as you get better, you'll be able to use this idea and apply it later. This other dark shape, which is another tree, must be an evergreen because it seems to be taken in winter. Okay, and the grass down here is pretty dark too, which makes it look like those white marble areas are a little bit lighter by comparison. So I'm just doing a simple value study. Whenever an artist uses the word study, it's just a practice drawing. All right, so it's not like homework or anything. If you feel like homework is always boring, you know, don't become an artist. Like, doing the studies are the fun part. You get to experiment a little bit more. So I got this dark area, and these trees are a little bit darker too. And the Capitol, for the most part, is pretty much white. There is a little bit of a shadow on this side of the arch, but we're not going to get obsessed with any of the details. So these big shadows are going to be important, especially when you're drawing a reflection in water, okay? Because water isn't a perfect mirror. And so what we're going to do is, I want you guys to start to think of taking the biggest shadows and just kind of drawing a line straight down over here, all the way down into the water. So any of those dark areas where they end, I want you to put a line. So for example, here I see those light areas, and I certainly see this dark area here, but there's kind of dark this way. So we're extending it into the water. I'm going to make this a little darker here. All right. So, and then if you have light shapes that you know that are going to be there, kind of draw those lines into the water as well. So what we just did is we projected those things down into our reflection. And I want you to think about what's happening in this picture. All right? So think about the light if it hits the top of this dome right here. The sun is somewhere behind us over here off to the side, but it hits this, and why does it look like it's light? Some of the light is coming directly at us into the camera or into our eyeball, but then some of it is hitting this dome, bouncing off of the water and then off of the water into our eyes. So it's not going to be as bright, but it's definitely going to be brighter than a dark area that doesn't bounce off that light. So let's look at, like, for example, this tree in our drawing. If it hits that, when it's dark, it doesn't reflect as much light. So there's going to be less light as it bounces off the same thing into the water. So right below, if you can look in the picture, look at that tree on the left. You can literally see a darker area that's right below the tree. So your reflections are a direct, like, transference of those lights and darks into it. But one other trick that I use is I try to use horizontal shading to start to shade those things in. Right? So I'm using dark areas. I'll put a darker shade in between using a horizontal shading stroke. It stays a little bit lighter if we were to draw exactly the same shape as if this line was dividing them. Right? This would be light. We're drawing a reflected shape lightly in here, and that's going to stay white. And the rest is going to be a little bit darker, but you see that the Capitol building is all the way up here. That's going to be light as well. So we're going to start off dark on this side because it's basically all dark. Then it's going to stay light here because it's reflecting this post. It's the exact copy but just flipped upside down. And then we'll go dark, a little bit darker below that. Okay, but you're going to see is if there was a tree across here, this is going to be darker down a little bit lower. It's literally reflecting this dark shape down here too. All right, how about this? It's a little bit lighter towards the edge, but we're seeing these kind of vertical streaks that go down, keeping it lighter near the front. Here's the shoreline, right? And we're leaving these kind of vertical streaks in here. But it's definitely darker on this side. We're keeping it light where the Capitol is reflecting. Now the reflection is never going to be as perfectly bright, so we're just going to give it a once over with a light stroke here. We're going to shade in some of these darks, kind of giving a mirrored look. It doesn't have to be perfect because that water is going to distort it a little bit. And we're going to start to see this reflection pop out. So water especially has a tendency to have these kind of squiggly but horizontal shapes, but that's really just what we call diffraction. Diffraction is different than reflection because think of it like if you're talking into a microphone without the foam cover, that foam cover diffracts the sound. It softens it a little bit. Diffraction is like a really puffy surface on a microscopic level that spreads the light out so it's not going to go directly, like bouncing off a mirror. Okay, like for example, if you hit a mirror with a laser, it's all going to bounce off in a direct direction. But if you have like a smoky glass surface like water, it's going to, not all of it's going to reflect off. It's going to spread out and diffuse into that ice or that smoky surface, so it won't be as sharp and in focus. But what did we do here? We took those vertical lines of reflection and we started to create this very unique sense of reflection. You can see this white shape of this monument popping out because I drew in the shadows of the grass behind it. Right? I still see the Capitol, and if this water in the picture were to continue lower, you could actually get the shape of that Capitol over here as well. So by drawing your reflections down and understanding where that light is coming from and why it changes that shape, you can start to just basically flip that thing over across that line of where the edge of the pond is and really start to experiment with some of these reflection techniques. All right. Another question is like, why does the water, especially in like a lake or the ocean, appear to be blue? It's because it's taking some of that reflected color from the sky. So reflection is happening all around us and in different degrees. Not everything is like a mirror, but keep in mind that white is a highly reflective color. It bounces back a lot of things. Dark colors don't tend to reflect, and that's why they appear dark. It's capturing all that light and hiding it from our eyes. So if you can think of color or light versus dark that way, it's a big step in understanding how to draw reflections in shiny objects. Now, I would say, yes, this water is shiny. It's definitely more shiny than, a piece of marble or a leaf. But let's dive back in and take a look at that bell again, because I think that's a pretty unique example. But before I do, if you've ever been to Chicago, or if you're from Chicago, there's a very famous sculpture by an artist named Anish Kapoor, and that is a sculpture called Cloudgate. A lot of people call it the Bean. And the Bean is this really interesting sculpture. It's like a bean shape, but then on the inside it has this really cool like funnel shape, but it's completely a mirror on the outside. And what it does is it plays with your reflection and warps it really interestingly. So let's take a look at that picture. Just give me 1 second to pull it up. Here we go. All right, so the bean up here is just an incredible example of a reflection. And I'll blow it up here for you so you can take a bigger look. There we go. Okay, so this is an incredible piece because what it takes advantage of is there's nothing painted on the outside of this object, right? It's reflecting, almost like bending the light back at our eyes in a unique way. It's taking advantage of the environment around it and kind of plastering it all over this shape. So reflective surfaces have fascinated mankind for a long time, and there's always even like, if you were making fun of somebody for getting easily distracted, you could say, oh, there's another shiny object in the room that they're chasing after. It's because shiny objects are naturally very fascinating. And you have all Greek myths, like Narcissus falls in love with his reflection in the pool of water, right? So reflection has this deep artistic history as something that's really seductive and something we look at very closely. So, for example, if we were to try to draw this bean, let's do a quick sketch and just think about what's going on here, because it's not a flat surface anymore. 1 second. Okay, and let me... All right, here's the bean. And let's just look at what's going on here, because we have an interesting environment around it. But if we had to do a shape, what I want to show you is the shape of the object is one thing. All right, we also have what we call the form of the object. So I'm drawing this kind of like weird teardrop shape, and then it goes underneath here, right? It's like an arching bean shape. So what's tough for a lot of young or starting artists is distinguishing between shape and form, okay? Now shape is what I just drew. It's two-dimensional, it's flat, okay? Anything we draw on here is going to be flat. But what we want to create is form. Now if you were a sculptor, you could literally make the form of this shape, right? But if you're drawing it, you're stuck with drawing shapes or the illusion of form. So how do we get that as an artist? Well, what's interesting here is I want you to just think about what this artist decided to do. Is what we used to do is that horizon line, but I want you to look for it in the picture. I'm seeing the horizon line is following the form now of this shape. Okay, so you see how the reflection of the ground, so at the bottom there's going to be the same color of the ground, tiles or concrete, and then above there you can see the sky, but the horizon follows the S curve of the base of this shape. And if you look closely at the edge of it, you see the buildings that are actually cropping up over here. They actually follow that shape, or what we call the contour of an object. In the past, I've used, contour lines are like the yoga pants of lines, right? They form fit. They stick to the shape of the form. And I'm pretty proud of that metaphor. Feel free to use it. But I want you guys to just keep that in mind. It's an easy way to understand how reflections are. They follow the form of the object. So you can see all these lines, those buildings get squished into the edge there, and all of the lines, even the top of them, can kind of like mess around. The clouds even have an arch to them, right? They kind of get squished in and they follow the shape. So with this knowledge alone, you will be able to start to think about any type of reflective object, especially like a steel ball or an ornament or something like that. Now let's think about shading when it comes to this. Are we shading it like a shadow? Well, reflective objects have a very unique idea behind them, and that they just don't. And if we were just drawing like a sphere, or just saying a bean was like a regular kidney bean or something like that, it doesn't have reflections on it, we just have shadows. Well, that's what can be a little bit weird about them. We expect there to be shadows here, but what's happening is on the bottom of this bean here, we're actually getting the same reflection of the tiles there. But if you look closely near the bottom, we do get a little bit of shadows. So down here, and then right underneath the bean, there is a shadow. I'm not going to get into detail about this, but there's something called ocular occlusion. This is like really heady stuff. I didn't even really learn it until recently. But there is a shadow typically underneath these things, because there's just some amount of light that's not getting through this thing, right? Even though it's reflecting a bunch of light down over here. So you see that cool shadow, and you can almost see through it, right? There's a little light area behind there. Let's put a little bit of background. Here's this like tree line. There's a tree over here, and some buildings that you certainly see. So even just with line work, we're getting to the core of what a reflection is, right? Our mind starts to read those lines and tell us this isn't a normal object here, it's reflective, and it's warping the reality around it, right? So you can have a lot of fun with this, and especially if you have tried some one-point perspective, there's some really cool things you can do with this 1 or 2 point perspective. All right, so here's, okay, that's a quick sketch, but we get the impression that this is not a normal object. Let's look a little bit more at the shading. Look at the bottom piece right here. There's definitely a shadow in here because there's just not any light underneath. But it doesn't mean that if you were to walk under there you couldn't see a reflection. It's just that compared to everywhere else, there's this weird shadow, and it's going to be because it's on the underside of this round shape. You're going to get it a little bit all the way around. It's certainly darker down here. We're starting to get that reflection pretty nice. What are some other dark areas? I'm seeing it right along the horizon. Those are actually trees in the park surrounding this. So I'm just going to add some dark lines that follow that horizon line. And notice if we compare between the sky up here that's reflected and the tiles here, this is definitely a little bit darker. So I'm going to tone that in so we start to see that difference. And there's like a darker area just to smooth that. It's not all perfect, but there's definitely a dark shadow down here. And today, I know this might be a little bit complex, but once you start to see accurately, you'll be able to draw accurately. And the problem with art is that most people think like, why can't I draw? It must be something wrong with my hand. I'm not good at it. That's really only the beauty about like your hand working. You can train your hand to get better, just like weightlifting. But same thing with seeing. If you can't see correctly as an artist, you won't be able to draw correctly as an artist. All right, so let's take a look. Let's shade those buildings in, and we'll really see if we can get that illusion to pop a little bit more. So I'm following with what we call contour lines, right? We're shading that curve so it gives us a really clear picture of what's going on with this form. Not all the buildings are as dark as each other, but I'm giving those curves a nice look, shading them in. And then I do want to crank up this shadow here where it gets close to the ground a little bit more. But as you can see, we just created this beautiful reflective surface inspired by another artist. If you haven't heard the name Anish Kapoor, check out his work. It's kind of controversial. He's a really big deal, right? So he's really popular. And one of the other things about him is there was this scientific discovery of this new black paint. I forget what it's called, like ultra black or something. It's so black, it almost looks like a black hole or something. And he is kind of infamous now because he patented this. He like copyrighted it. So he's the only artist that can use this perfect black or something like that. So there's all these other like artists slash scientists that came up with new colors that are trying to get back at him and saying that like everyone can use this except Anish Kapoor. So people are kind of like going against him because he's kind of a, I don't know, let's just say his ego has kind of gotten in the way of being a citizen of the world or something like that. But all right, so I think we have enough of this object here. I'd be curious, we have maybe a couple people from the Chicago area here. Hopefully, if has anyone here on the chat seen the Cloud Gate or the Bean? It'd be interesting to know if you have any fun memories of that. But I think this is just a really unique example of how the form of an object, right, those contour lines that shape around it, we can really predict how those, what would otherwise be a straight up building, how would that change, right? So when you're talking reflection, you're literally just drawing the things that are around it, just in a unique way that goes with the form. All right, so let's move on to another one. I'll pull up that picture of a bell, and I'll start by just taking one more close look at it to see if there's anything we can learn. Okay, so this is kind of my large view, but what's difficult about a shape like this is there's two different materials. So when I say two different materials, let's just think of what we're talking about. First of all, the top part of the bell is like silver. So it's like a mirror, and that really reflects light very clearly. But then we have some other forms up top, like the little button. It's too small for us to notice any major details. It's not polished to a mirror like that. We also have things down at the bottom, that black part, that doesn't reflect as effectively, but we still can see reflections. And if you understand reflections on a mirror, you can actually start to think of like reflections on objects that are slightly shiny or darker, right? So let's look and try to recreate some of this bell drawing here. I'm going to pull it to the side, keep it a little bit smaller, and see if we can try to recreate that. Okay, so first let's get the general shape going. So I'm going to get an arch. Okay, and I can make it a little bit flatter at the top, not much. At the bottom, instead of drawing this as a flat bottom, I'm going to add kind of like a parentheses, give it like an oval shape to make it 3D. You notice that the bell kind of steps down like this. I'm going to add a little bit of a arch here, and it's going to follow it like that. Now the bottom part starts a little bit lower, but similarly it kind of comes out and creates that platform, and it goes down. And in between where those kind of change corners, we're going to just draw a line here. And this is what we're just drawing the form right now. We're not worrying about the reflections. So that's a good general shape. All right. And for this part of the bell, let's add another line here. It's like a flat wall on this side. Okay, so we have the bell shape. And then at the center, it doesn't start at the top. We actually have to think of the center because we can see part of the top of this thing. We're starting the center right here. I'm going to draw an oval right at the top here. And then I'm just going to draw another oval here for this round shape. And then an oval for the little ringer up there with a little tube that goes down into the top. So this is a pretty basic setup. We can still map those reflections on. All right. Now I want to point something out. Let's say you have a bell like this at home and you take a picture of it. What you're going to notice in the reflection is you're going to see a picture of yourself right here, right? You're going to be in the picture. And so what's weird about this one, and I kind of mess with people's minds a little bit, and when I posted this on Instagram, people called me out on this. They're like, wait a second. Nobody is there in the room observing this reflective object. So what did I do? I actually had the bell in front of me when I was drawing it, and then I moved my head to try to see like what would be behind me if I wasn't in the room. So this is kind of an optical illusion if you think about it. There's like no one in the room to observe this bell. So I was playing with people's minds a little bit. But I want you guys to keep in mind, you would see a reflection of yourself either with a camera or your face or your pencil. All those things would be inside the room. All right, so, but let's just look at what's going on in this picture. So I'm going to first focus on how those reflection lines, or if there were some straight walls in here, how would they look? Everything's going to kind of follow the shape of this form. So I'm going to draw a few lines that just follow it out. When we talked about those spheres and round objects, we talked about kind of the pumpkin lines. If you're looking at a globe, they kind of go like this, right? If we follow them down, they go outward, follow this path, and they kind of just map out this way. Kind of spread out from that center point at the top. So can you see how the lines change? This one will be straight. This one is over here, it goes down. And this is just mapping the form with contour lines. It's also what video game designers do when they design a mesh or something that it's like a 3D object. This is a way for us to understand 3D objects without shading. It's almost like a more mathematical way. And in the back we see a little bit of one that goes around to the back there. All right, so if we think of this round object, if it's in a room that's more of a rectangular box, those straight lines are going to now follow these lines in here. So you can kind of see that at the top. And let's look at the bottom left corner. There's a door. Since this is a flatter area, this is where the door is. But the top of it is going to be kind of curved. It's going to follow something like this. So if there was a wall or ceiling, right? If there's a door down here, and this was a wall in the background, it's no longer straight. It's just going to be bent like this around here. And then let's look at, here's the corner of the wall, and then what you'll see is these are like the windows, and then we have this light right here, but it curves out like that. It still follows these shapes. That's going to be a light area. The room itself has a weird arch to it, right? The ceiling. Now it doesn't have this shape in reality, but what's happening is like these are really light areas that are bouncing the light around. And in the middle you see this post. It's pretty light because it's catching a lot of the light in the room. Okay. And then you'll also see some shadows. You know, that's the ceiling. There's a highlight over here where we just get pure white. But we're starting to map those shadows out. Okay, so what I'm going to do is start to shade in the background shadows, just to get a sense of where our light parts are. So here's the ceiling. Here's the wall. In this picture, I feel like the ceiling is kind of the darkest over in this corner, so I'm going to darken that up. And then this one is kind of dark on this wall. But the post is catching a lot of light from this light source over here. So I'm making that dark, or sorry, light, but dark around it to make it pop out. Then what's going on in this right corner? These are actually the windows. So you'll see like the window posts are almost completely white, but then the outside is purely black because this was done at night. So here's a window. Here's another window. So I'm literally drawing the room in the background instead of thinking about this as anything like a bell, right? I'm literally creating a new shape or a new way of doing this and mapping it onto an object. So it's a little bit out there. And at the top, I'm just going to shade some shadows, and I can't really tell what's going on up here. There's some really weird stuff. But I'm just adding in some shadow or dark areas on the reflection. And there's a dark shape up here. This does get pretty dark near there because it's far from the light. And forgive me if this is kind of complex. You know, we're constructing a room from scratch that we're not really looking at through a reflection. But I want you guys to just get the experience in reverse here. So when you do take a look at an object that's making you question, wait a second, what is that reflection? It's not just a simple, little bright spot. So I have this very unique set of shapes that really describe something in the background. So let's make it even more recognizable. Now I'm going to draw a picture on this post here. Okay, so you could actually see that. Okay, this is a light that was sitting up here, and it's going to be a little bit darker behind it to make it appear much brighter. So here's our windows. But as you can see, by drawing this shape, we can really bring out the form of this bell. All right. Now, what about when it gets to the bottom here? It's too small to see any of the other details, but it brings down the dark shape. So look at this. The dark shape of the window is kind of like squeezed off. It's got this weird shape here and pulls it down, just like in our capital drawing, pulls down through the form. So there's our dark spot for that window. Second one, it's over here, but it gets a little bit less clear. You just see it as kind of a few dark shapes, but there's definitely that light part that kind of comes through. So we follow that down, and it's pulling some of those objects slightly to the left. And this will make more sense once you get something like this in front of you, but I just wanted you to just get the idea of what's going on with these complex reflections. Okay, so that would be like a perfect mirrored area, but you do notice there's like this light kind of stripe here that doesn't reflect any detail. I'm going to show you that with the eraser. So the eraser is a really helpful tool in this. So what's going on here? Why is it just pure white? Okay, on this little streak here. Part of that's because think of a laser, right? If you had a laser beam, okay, and it was shooting this direction, and your eyeball was right here, okay, if you put a mirror at 45 degrees, this thing would bounce off directly into your eye. Probably not a good idea to shoot a laser into your eye, by the way. All right, but think of that mirror. This 45 degrees, what's happening here is the light that was coming up from above my desk is hitting this little curve. And right in the pocket of that little curve, it's shooting that pure light directly into my eye. So I can't see any of the other details, even if I wanted to. So that is called, a spectral highlight, something that really just almost like burns your retinas a little bit it blocks out your view of anything else that you were thinking of seeing. All right, now how about this black area? Let's just look at the highlight here. We see that same spectral highlight. It's kind of got this swooping curve, and the rest of it is pretty dark. I'm generally shading that in, but I'm on the lookout. Some other spectral highlights here, and a little bit on the side, and some kind of creeping out from over here. So I'm darkening this stuff up. Now, I feel like I kind of got down to business today and really started sketching. It's partially because I'm just always really excited about this fascinating topic. So I do want to thank you guys. I see a lot of people in the chat today. Jim, welcome back. Kate, Antonia, Joe, Rick, Nancy, thank you for joining in today. So as I kind of finish this up, I do want to fill you in a little bit about the schedule coming up. Originally, I thought this was going to be a 2-week containment, or at least I was hopeful that it was. But as Jim was talking about yesterday, I haven't really taken a day off. So we've done 14 straight days of live lessons. And I'm hoping you guys are getting something to take away, because I've really been enjoying sharing this. It gives me an opportunity to even revisit some of those fundamentals. But the schedule, I want to be sure that I'm providing like high quality stuff and I'm not burning you guys out. So I'm going to shift to Wednesdays and Saturdays at 3:30. I'll be doing live casts. And in between, I hope to put out a few other videos of me doing more of my professional level work. That being said, what I do professionally is I do commissions, portraits, and freelance illustration and art. So if you know anyone who's looking for those services, I can certainly answer any questions. And if you're interested in hiring me to do any portraits or work that you're interested in, I'd be happy to help you out with that. But otherwise, I will be seeing you guys every Wednesday and Saturday at 3:30. So we're kind of rounding the curve here, but what I'll do is I like to think of that pure black, what we talked about in that colored pencil lesson, as kind of our seasoning, our thing to way to punch up our drawings. It's the salt and pepper of our drawings. I got this 8B pencil, which I'm going to really punch in some blacks here. So I know that my windows were the dark area. Really cranking those down. Another thing you'll notice is sharp kind of like corners are kind of important when it comes to these really cool reflections, especially if there was a corner in there and they kind of just like shift around. So emphasize some of those corners. Look for some other dark areas. There's one back here. Right next to where the bell attaches. We didn't really develop that just yet. So let's do that here. I'm going to put some kind of lines that go out from the center there and a shadow behind. Like I said, don't feel pressure to make these things a photograph, because you'd be better off taking a photograph if you want to do that. We're just trying to get the impression. And I don't know. So another trick to make some of the areas look shiny, put a dark area right next to a really white area. That will make it pop out. And I'm kind of inventing some of these details as I go. So don't be afraid to use that black to punch up your highlights. Picture like a chemistry lab that, two ingredients, when they mix or they're put next to each other, they react. That's how light and dark are. You want to just, if you want to amplify one or the other, put them right next to each other and you'll be surprised at the results. But let me just review before I sign off today. What we did is we followed the form. Okay, so if we go back to our pictures, let's look at the bean here. We saw what would normally be a horizon line that would be straight. started to follow the form and warp along and create that reflection shape. And when we started off with this picture of the Capitol reflected in a pond, right? And what did these reflections do? They followed the form of the lake. It was straight and flat. So if you have a flat surface, we have these straight reflections that kind of just flip the object upside down. If we have rounded reflections, they certainly follow the form. Everything inside of them as they reflect are taking on this new form. So I want you guys to just keep that in mind, be patient, and really trust that all the information is inside of that reflection that you see, and it's going to reflect whatever is around you. So again, taking your moment of reflection every day to join me is really incredible. I can't thank you enough for supporting me throughout this. And again, I hope you've come away with some new knowledge, or at least a tip or a trick here and there to help you in your pursuit of either appreciating art or learning to love making it. So thank you guys again. This has been Art with Anderson, and I'll be seeing you guys every Wednesday and Saturday for the next couple weeks here till we can get through this isolation. And I hope that this will bring us all closer together through art and creativity. So thanks again for tuning in today. I'll see you on Wednesday, and enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thank you.